all that maddens and torments, all that stirs up the lees of things, all truth with malice in it, all that cracks the sinews and cakes the brain, all the subtle demonisms of life and thought, all evil, to crazy Ahab, were visibly personified, and made practically assailable in Moby Dick. He piled upon the whale's white hump the sum of all the general rage and hate felt by his whole race from Adam down. And then, as if his chest had been a mortar, he burst his hot heart's shell upon it. Reliant and Enterprise finally meet, and despite Savak's quoting of regulations, they go in with shields lowered when it doesn't respond to hails. Reliant gets to point-blank range, raises shields, and blasts Enterprise, causing heavy damage in engineering. Enterprise cannot counterattack, because in their now weakened state, their weapons can't penetrate Reliant's shields. Remember that point. Kirk turns to Spock for help.
Damage report.
Ah, where would I be without you to point at the blinking lights, Spock? A message comes through and Kirk and Khan finally meet once again, and Khan relishes the moment. If you'll allow me a moment's diversion. Earlier this month I was at a red light, ready to turn right, but stopped, which caused the driver behind me to honk repeatedly. However, while it's legal to turn right on red, it's generally not advisable when the road's wet and there's a tractor-trailer approaching. Apparently, though, the man behind me felt that we were not just two drivers on the road, no. Somehow we were joined in an unspoken suicide pact that I was thoughtlessly reneging on. When the truck passed, I went on my way, followed by the other driver, who, ignoring the wet pavement, ran another red light and, unconcerned about little things like presence of other vehicles on the roads, sped up to pull alongside me and repeatedly honk his horn to get my attention for quite a long time, until finally I gave in and looked at him so that he could flip me off and be on his way. That was all. This Cro-Magnon felt that it wasn't enough to just flip me off. He was prepared to risk himself and others to make sure that I was aware he was doing it. He couldn't handle me not knowing it, whereas I am quite unbothered that he'll never know that I'm saying he's a phallically challenged, maladjusted, uncivilized, moronic social cripple whose only possible contribution for society would be if someone created an engine that could run on loser. And while he will never know, I'm merely fine with sharing that opinion with tens of thousands of people instead. Anyway, its relevance is that some people, like Khan in this throwback, cannot content themselves with the knowledge that they have some kind of revenge. They must know the target of their ire knows it too. So Khan makes the mistake that so many villains have. He gloats over Kirk, because Khan knows that Kirk almost certainly never thought much about Khan again, whereas he was all that would occupy Khan's thoughts when hardships come. To show him that the man he forgot was his better, who rose up from the nothing of SETI Alpha 5 to destroy him and his ship. Kirk, seeing the writing on the wall, offers to give himself up if Khan will spare his crew. Khan agrees if Kirk will also provide all his tapes on Genesis. He gives Kirk a minute to do so. Again, remember that point. It'll be important. Kirk and Spock use this time to determine Reliant's control code and lower its shields, so now their weapons are strong enough and Enterprise can blast it in return. With Reliant's weapons now damaged, it means they'll have to withdraw, even though Khan refuses at first. It takes Joachim to convince him to withdraw for the moment, that the damage to Enterprise is far more extensive and it won't be going anywhere. At this point we should identify the role of Joachim, who is to be Khan's Starbuck. No, not that Starbuck. No, not that one either. Come on! The first mate of Ahab and Moby Dick, the one of the crew who, though loyal, sought to check Ahab's vengeance, and the one who would point out the misfortune it would bring. For an instant, in the flashing eye of the mate and his fiery cheek, you would have almost thought that he had really received the blaze of the leveled tube. But mastering his emotion, he half calmly rose, and as he quitted the cabin, paused for an instant and said, "Thou hast outraged, not insulted me, sir. But for that I ask thee not to beware of Starbuck. Thou wouldst but laugh. But let Ahab beware of Ahab. Beware of thyself, old man." Joachim is likewise loyal to Khan, probably far more, but is nevertheless his voice of reason, the one who sees beyond vengeance to the practical need of reclaiming their lost power. But Khan is still fixated, perhaps even more so now that Kirk has outsmarted him. From this point on, we see him sporting a wound from the battle, located over his heart. At this point, Scotty arrives with Preston, his nephew, whom Kirk had met during the inspection in engineering. "He's badly hurt, sir, so I brought him here to sick bay." This This is the bridge, Scotty. And then I'm heading back down to finish drinking the engines. I mean, repairing the scotch. Crap. Spock, Vulcan or no, is visibly shaken at Preston's condition, that one of his students is perishing on his watch. It likewise foreshadows Savik's behavior at the end of the film. Preston soon dies, and Spock informs Kirk that power is now restored enough for impulse. Based on description, it's very likely that it was Spock, not Scotty's nephew, who should have died during this initial attack by Khan. Remember that he was going to die much earlier in the film, and his death was pushed back? Also remember those events I mentioned. Damage to engineering, not enough power, a ticking clock before destruction. Those are the exact same circumstances of Spock's death. Also, as you watch the rest of the picture, you might note that it would require only a few small modifications for everything Spock does to be done by someone else. He remains on the ship, giving status reports, the kind of stuff Scotty, Uhura, and Sulu could have done. If you exclude simply being in the background, he's on screen for less than 4 minutes for the following 33 minutes, when his sacrifice then begins. And finally, Savik essentially serves as Spock's role on the away mission, and presumably could have handled the science officer duties in his stead. So Enterprise arrives at Regula 1, and no one is answering. And with sensors damaged, they can't really tell what's going on, or if Khan's hiding somewhere nearby. Kirk figures he and Bones will go over to check it out.
Begging the Admiral's pardon. General Order 15. No flag officer shall beam into a hazardous area without armed escort.
There's no such regulation.
Really? That explains so much about Starfleet. They start looking around and discover...
Jim!
You know those medicinal purposes, Jim? It applies right now. All the scientists here are dead, but they soon find Chekhov and Terrell alive in a case. They describe the control they were put under, and how Khan tortured and killed these people to get Genesis, but he couldn't find it. Kirk looks around, sees the escape pods are all there, and the transporter set, so he gets ready to beam everyone down to the planet. He also contacts the Enterprise, where Spock explains that if they continue to do things by the book, hours would seem like days, like sitting through Broken Bow again. They could get auxiliary power back up in 2 days, he says, which means Khan, who's listening, knows Enterprise is helpless. They beam down, and 5 of them get jumped by William Catt. Actually, that's David, who's here with Carol Marcus and Dr. Redshirt, who quickly buys it when Terrell and Chekhov pull phasers. Khan beams up Genesis and tells Terrell to kill Kirk, but they can't obey such an order, and Terrell turns his phaser on himself. Apparently, the SETI eel figures out what's happened, because it suddenly decides to haul ass out of Chekhov's ear, only for Kirk to phaser that too. Kirk then picks up the comm unit and goads Khan, but Khan has decided on another vengeance. He'll leave Kirk stranded on the planet, and once he destroys the helpless Enterprise, no one will ever think to come looking for him, just as he had been left. Kirk reacts with expected subtlety.
Come! Come! It's the Tambourine Man!
After David takes the others to go see the Genesis cave, it's revealed that Kirk was David's father, that he'd always known, but at Carol's request had stayed out of his life because of his career. And with none of his crew there to see him, Kirk can admit to the real truth and show the dimensions of his character. Kirk's always been presented as cunning, how when in a situation where there's no way out, he'll use his mind or his fists to find a way to escape, part of one of this film's themes. He seems in many instances to be flying by the seat of his pants and barely holding off ultimate doom and grinning all the while. But much of the attitude is one of confidence for his crew, because without them here, he admits to his feelings, written all over him. He feels foolish for finally getting back in the big chair and leaving a ship defenseless before his enemy. His people killed, and all because of a mistake that even a trainee saw coming. His adversary seems to constantly be ahead of him, who spent 15 years rotting in exile and could still best him again and again. The thought is there. I made a mistake. I'm not cut out to sit in the big chair anymore, and all this is proof of it. No matter what Bones and Spock says, I'm too damn old to do this anymore. And while Shatner is often mocked as a ham actor, the quiet way he expresses all this shows that, while, yeah, sometimes he's the guy who screams Khan. Sometimes he's also the guy who can scream even louder without going above a whisper. Meanwhile, Reliant has fixed its engines fully and goes to finish off Enterprise, but it isn't there. On Regula, Kirk enters the beer clock that is the Genesis cave, finding an Eden within. And what else do you do in Eden but eat an apple? Anyway, with the grimness of their situation, Kirk had earlier assured Saavik that despite the situation, he agrees with Spock's fond saying that there are always possibilities. Now she asks about the Kobayashi Maru scenario again, no doubt wondering how Kirk had similarly faced the situation. The lesson revealed was, he cheated by reprogramming the simulator. He announces as part of it all that he doesn't believe in a no-win scenario, no matter what the test is supposed to prove. But Saavik points out the reverse, that it means he's never had to face a no-win scenario. As if in response, Enterprise arrives and beams them all up, as Spock was exaggerating, and 2 days meant 2 hours. And with Reliant on the opposite side of the planet, stronger and faster, it's now a race. So Enterprise has no choice but to escape into a nearby nebula. Reliant chases, knowing that if Enterprise gets in there, they'll lose it, and they fire off a torpedo to try to discourage them, but that doesn't work. Meanwhile, Chet comes onto the bridge to ask if anyone would like to shoot a quick 9 holes before retiring to the club for brandy and cigars. As Enterprise enters, Reliant stops, because it would be foolish for them to follow, but Kirk knows Khan's weakness.
Khan, I'm laughing at the superior intellect.
In his fiery eyes of scorn and triumph, you then saw Ahab in all his fatal pride.